Perfect.
So hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a second here. Pete, I'm going to throw it to you.
All right. So this is kind of the official vendor conference or webinar for what we are calling the 2025 RFP 035-PR. It's for the Charge Up Dane County site hosts for EV charging infrastructure. If you are here, you're likely already on OpenGov, which is great. And hopefully that was pretty seamless, getting an account registered on there, and being able to see this solicitation and all the good detail that comes with it. I'll just run through a couple quick things here. We released it on May 14th. The question submission deadline is June 3rd currently, and that would be next Tuesday, this coming Tuesday at 4 o'clock p.m. The question response deadline is the following day, June 4th, and that's a Wednesday at 4 o'clock. If you've been following and notice any questions that have come in, we work really hard to get those answered right away. So I just always want to reiterate that we're not sitting on any of the questions and waiting until that deadline. We are trying to get answers to you all right away as fast as we can. So if you do have questions, big or small, keep them coming. You can use the question and answer portal within OpenGov. It's one of the tabs that you'll see on your screen. And you can pose any sort of question on there that you want, and we will work on providing the answer. So those are the question deadlines. The proposal submission deadline is June 13th at 2 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. I want to just reiterate on that. 2 o'clock is 2 o'clock. It's on the OpenGov platform. Everything's electronic. When we hit that deadline at 2 o'clock, it locks everything down. We cannot touch anything. Hands are tied. We can't accept anything then after that. So I always like to tell everyone, if you can, try to start this the day ahead of time or the morning of at least. Provide yourself a little bit of room in case there's a technical difficulty you run into. If you do run into an issue during the application process, OpenGov customer support is your best method to help figure out a solution to the issue. If you come to us, we're probably going to point you right to OpenGov support, because we don't have the capability of seeing the inside or the backside of what you guys are doing. It doesn't allow us to, for very good reasons. Um, but OpenGov customer support typically has been really good to work with, but you got to allow yourself that time. So don't wait till 1 o'clock with the 2 o'clock deadline. Don't even wait till noon if you can help it. Try to go the day before. Try to go the morning of if need be. Give yourself a little bit of breathing space there. So those are the big deadlines that I always want to go over. Otherwise, I'll be on this meeting the entire time. If there's anything related to RFP or solicitation type questions, procurement related, I will jump in. Otherwise, it'll be the Office of Energy and Climate that will be probably answering everything from there. So, with that, I thank you guys for coming today. I hope this is beneficial for you. And I'm going to toss it over to Kathy.
Thanks, Pete. We appreciate all of your support through this and your prompt posting of all of those answers to the questions. So I'm Kathy Kuntz. I direct the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change, and I'm leading our Charge Up effort. And joining me today is Anita. Anita, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Anita Hussey. I'm a Community Energy Fellow with our Office of Energy and Climate Change.
And with that, I'm going to pull up a slide deck. So we thought it was useful to walk you all through some background that'll answer, I think, some of the questions, and then we'll have plenty of time for more questions. So, for folks who are not familiar with us, the Office of Energy and Climate Change has been around since 2017 in Dane County. Our purpose is to really lead action on climate, both on internal county operations and county-wide. And since the publication of our climate action plan in 2020, we've really been focused on implementing that, on making clean energy solutions happen in a way that benefits everyone. And the context for Charge Up Dane County is that Dane County tends to be an early adopter in Wisconsin. So we represent 10% of the state's population, but 25% of all EVs registered in Wisconsin are here in Dane County. So that means we have a really robust electric vehicle market and an increasingly robust used EV market. A couple of years ago, the Greater Madison MPO did an analysis of EV infrastructure across the county, and it was really clear that we had some stark gaps in where people had access to charging. And that was really the impetus for a number of communities coming together with the county and utilities to write this grant application and secure this funding that lets us move forward with Charge Up Dane County.
So let's talk a little bit about what is special about electric vehicles. What are the benefits of driving an EV? There's about three big benefits of driving an electric vehicle. The first one being is that it saves you money because for the most part, they have a lower cost of ownership in comparison to a gas vehicle. And then the biggest reason for that is because it is cheaper to charge an EV than it is to fuel a gas vehicle. And then in general, they tend to have less maintenance. The second benefit to EVs is that they tend to reduce emissions because they do have no tailpipe emissions, right? Which leads to cleaner neighborhood air and then just in general more of a clean and quiet driving experience. The last reason I want to highlight here is just looking towards the future, we're going to be electrifying. EVs are the future. So it's very important to ensure that everybody is going to be participating in that transition and is participating equitably. Next slide, please. So let's say you do want to get an EV. Where do you charge your vehicle? The best place to do that is in your own home if you have a garage. And I'd say the majority of EV owners agree with that. 90% of them do charge at home because it is the easiest way to charge your vehicle. It's like plugging your phone at night before you go to bed. Unlike, the tens of hours you have to spend each year to go to the gas station, get outside. It's Wisconsin, it's cold, you have to wait. That is a very different experience with EVs. You just plug it in, you forget about it, and then you go back to your vehicle the next day. But the caveat is that you need to have a garage. So let's talk about some few facts about charging. So as we know, EVs use electricity like your phone, but there are some hybrid EVs that use both gas and electricity. In terms of charging, there are 3 levels of charging available out there. The first one is level 1, and it's the slowest level of charging. It requires about 120 volt outlet. It charges at about 2 to 5 miles per hour in terms of speed. And then the next level up is level 2, which is faster charging, 10 to 20 miles per hour. It just needs a 240 volt capacity for residential and a 208 volt capacity for commercial. And because it is much faster than level 1, it is the focus of our project, and it is a priority. The fastest level of charging is level 3, which needs a DC outlet, and it charges at great speeds of 180 to 240 miles per hour. But because it is the most expensive, it is now the focus of our program. So we talked about how EVs are cheaper to own because of fueling and charging, right? Let's give you some numbers to back that up. So you have a garage, right? Fabulous. You have an EV. The cost of charging your EV per mile is 5 cents. So you drive about 200 miles a week. It costs you about $10 a week to charge your vehicle at home. And that annually adds up to about $500. Let's say you drive an ICE vehicle, right? You drive a gas vehicle. That is more than double, 12 cents a mile, $24 a week, about $1,200 a year. But there's also more expensive options. You could drive a truck or an SUV, which is like 3 times the amount of charging an EV at home, or $30 a week and $1,500 each year. But if you don't have a garage, what happens? You have to find a public charger, and a lot of our public chargers tend to be fast chargers. They're great. They charge really fast, but they are very expensive compared to home charging. We're talking about 20 cents a mile. And then that $10, charging you get at home becomes $40 and then $2,000 across the year. All of a sudden, these savings that we talked about, they're no longer realized, which brings us to our last category, affordable public EV charging, which competes essentially with the rate you pay at home. It enables people without garages to experience the cost benefits of EVs. And this is just a visualization of what those costs look like, right? We see the first bar is at-home charging. It is the cheapest option. And then as you know, the next two options are the gas options that we talked about, much more expensive. Unfortunately, the red column being the fast charging, it is incredibly efficient in terms of time, but it is very costly. So the last category, being the affordable public charging, really just competes with the at-home EV charging.
So our vision here for Charge Up Dane County is equitable access to the benefits of electric vehicles. Our core strategy is we don't want to leave people behind. We know EVs are the future. We want everyone to have access to this preferable technology. We also are proactively thinking about charging because we want to avoid the mistakes of the past. We're still, as local governments, coping with the inequitable access to broadband. We don't have any reason to repeat that. Let's proactively get charging, affordable charging into neighborhoods so that everyone has access. And really, this federal funding enabled us to do that. It really gave us that opportunity to address the gaps. So our vision for Charge Up Dane County is to fund charging infrastructure that the private market is unlikely to install themselves. So this is one of the maps from our proposal, and it shows you where the yellow areas are where there's multifamily housing in Dane County, and you see how there is a fair amount of multifamily housing where there is no charging right now. There are also a lot of rural areas with no or very little charging. Our third priority is multimodal transportation hubs. So think of that as a place where a bus route goes, or a place where someone might park their car and bike the rest of the way to work, trying to support all of the ways we have multimodal transportation in the county. When we think about the possible locations for these charging stations, we think that local businesses might be interested in hosting them, that faith communities or community-based organizations, private landowners. We've heard from a few developers who have larger parking lots at their multifamily buildings and could make spots available to the public. But also local governments and school districts are an option here. And so the point of the RFP is to really cast a wide net to identify site hosts who could be good hosts for our project.
We've talked about the benefits of driving an electric vehicle. Let's talk about the benefits of being a site host. And there's lots of benefits to being a site host. The first one being that you get free charging equipment that are going to be permanent upgrades to your property. In addition to the equipment itself, you're going to be getting free charger installation. You have to pay for neither of those things. And then for the first 5 years after the chargers are operable, you do not pay for the maintenance cost. You ultimately do not have to pay for charging fees and electricity fees out of your pocket because the customers are essentially going to be supplementing that. Although first, you're going to be charged those fees. Customers charging are going to be paying that exact amount. It levels out. And then lastly, there's tons of potential to increase your property value, to increase customer traffic in your location, and then just improve neighborhood goodwill and your reputation. So in terms of the requirements for host sites, you are going to be hosting 4 charging stations that will need to be all available at once at all times. And then they need to be dedicated to EV parking. So that means that no other vehicles park there. One of those 4 charging stations is going to be ADA compliant, which in terms of the amount of space that you need to provide to this project for the next 5 years, we're talking about 5 to 6 adjacent parking spots. And then one of the most important requirements is that this needs to be publicly available charging 24/7. So if the available space you have is behind a private garage, it's behind a gate, or you have to pay to get in, you're not eligible for this. It needs to be easily accessible at all times. And then, of course, there's going to be reporting requirements that we're going to communicate to you. And then all of this is a commitment for the next 5 years after, charges are operable. Now, if you've made your account in a procurement, you have
Okay, it seems like one of us froze. I'm not sure if that's me or Anita. It looks like it.
I can hear you, Kathy, so I
Okay,
think
okay.
you're good.
Okay, so I think that was Anita. So I will just finish by saying she was saying that the site host agreement is attachment A in OpenGov, and we do want everyone to download that and review that. That is the agreement that we'll talk about needing to be signed as part of this process. The next thing we want to say is I want to kind of give you an example of how the charging fees could cover the cost of the electricity provided and related costs. So again, we're trying to put charging where charging is unlikely to happen in the private market. That means we're not talking about sites where a site host is going to become a billionaire offering EV charging. Our aim here is that you're going to break even, that there's going to be no out-of-pocket cost for you having this infrastructure that was free for you to get. So there are really 3 sets of expenses. There's the electricity that goes through the charger. There is a 3 cents per kilowatt hour state excise tax. And then there's the time you spend doing the reporting and what I'm going to call kind of handling fees in this. The revenue side of this is the charges that are paid by EV owners using the charger. And our intent and part of the site host agreement is that we're going to work with entities. We have multiple utilities serving Dane County, so electric rates vary from community to community. We're going to help everyone kind of set this pricing in a way that makes that affordable example. So in my example here, the charging is 19 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, earlier, Anita talked about cost per mile. I'm talking about it cost per kilowatt hour. You typically get about 3 miles per kilowatt hour when you're EV charging as a rule of thumb. So that kind of lets you. But so in a typical business or local government account here in Dane County, the entity might pay about 15 cents for the electricity. There's that state tax, there's a little bit of handling. So we might conclude that 19 cents a kilowatt hour is a good option for the charging for this particular situation. So that's kind of how we're thinking about that math there. And Nada, are you back?
Think so. My connection is unstable, but I think I'm back now. So, some things to know about applying. You need to register as a vendor in the county's e-procurement portal, which will provide you additional information on how to do that. And one thing to know at this point is that if you're willing, if you're trying to put multiple locations into the application, you're going to need an individual vendor.
Oops, we lost her again. You're going to need an individual vendor account for each application. So you're going to register as a vendor in OpenGov, fill out the application, and then if you have another site, if you're a local government who has two sites you want to apply for, you're going to set up a second account and apply for that second site, is how that works. And I said earlier, we're trying to cast a wide net. I'll give you a sense of what happens after June 13th. So we're hoping we get a wide array of applications. We're going to take those applications and review them based on priorities. In the OpenGov documents, it talks about how we're going to score those applications initially. That means we'll end up with a smaller bundle of those sites that we think are good candidates to be site hosts. We've hired KL Engineering as our design firm for this work. So we're going to take those selected sites and give them to KL. KL is going to start with a desktop review. So they're going to look at all the sites and look at the kind of plat information and different data that they have as people who do a lot of civil engineering work to figure out, are these sites viable? And then the sites that are deemed viable there, KL as a next step will do a site visit where they'll collect more data for the design process. Our ideal is everywhere we go for a site visit is going to be a site because we don't want to waste resources on sites that aren't going to move forward. Inevitably, though, there probably will be a few sites, and you see, we might lose one more fish between step 3 and 4 because there might be some flaw that we only can see when we get there. Ultimately, though, we will have this set of sites that we all believe are viable sites. Then KL will do an initial design, which involves some environmental reviews, some initial cost estimates for us. The county and the host of that site will sign the site host agreement. And then we will send paperwork to the Federal Highway Administration, the folks who we received the grant from. And once they approve a package of sites, they will approve us moving forward with final design and construction. And under our grant, we want to accomplish 60 to 70 sites in total. So that's sort of how the net narrows over time. The last thing I'll say before I throw it open for questions is we've received some questions, and I want to just chat about a couple of these a little bit. We got a question about kind of where the charging equipment happens in this. And so under the way our grant agreement with the Federal Highway Administration works, procuring charging equipment is part of construction. So after we have a set of site hosts approved to move forward, we will do an RFP for charging equipment, but that comes later. We've talked a bit about upfront costs for hosts. It's really our aim that we're building a partnership here. The host is dedicating parking to EV charging for 5 years. That is the financial commitment from the host. Folks asked more recently if it was possible to put 2 chargers in one location and 2 in another, and it is not. The federal requirements are super clear on all of this, that they want 4 adjacent chargers. And there's a couple of reasons for that. You know, when you have 4 chargers at a location, there are better odds that when someone shows up to charge, at least one charger will be available. Part of what we're trying to do here is create an infrastructure that folks can rely on. There are also clearly some cost savings when we do 4 at a location versus citing them more broadly. We've also had some questions about insurance implications. People asking about whether their insurance will cover this installation and operating this on their facility. And I encourage people to reach out to their insurance companies. Although I would also reiterate something Pete said at the onset, you know, there's a process here that we're going to go through to figure things out. And so raising your hand right now that you're interested doesn't lock you into something. You know, we have time to figure out with your insurance company the specifics of that. We also got some questions about long-term maintenance. So, you know, the original agreement covers 5 years of maintenance on that site. And I think the thing to be aware of here is the entire EV industry, and certainly charging, is evolving pretty rapidly. So 5 years from now, I think it's hard for any of us to predict what the situation might be. If you are a site host, though, you've got permanent infrastructure out to charging sites. So it might turn out in 5 years that there's an amazing deal from a vendor to switch to their equipment and they cover the maintenance, and who knows what that could look like by then. A site host might opt to do that. A site host might go, we've had great luck with this. We're just going to keep using it, and maybe we find a local vendor for maintenance. It's going to be up to the site host because the equipment and the infrastructure is all yours, and your commitment to us in the federal government is finished. So you've got flexibility about what you do with that, but you do have permanent infrastructure, which I think is a really important piece of this. And again, see the OpenGov for like full responses to those and a few other questions. Those were like really the highlights though of what I saw there. And then I'm gonna, with that, say thanks and see what questions we've got in the chat or Q&A. And I'm maybe gonna stop sharing so that I can see all those options more easily.
Kathy, I did answer one of them already, and it was a deadline question, just confirming that it was June 13th at 2:00 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Awesome. And the other question there is no cost for 5 years. So I am sensitive that, you know, it is hard to guarantee things here, but the federal funding will cover the installation of the equipment, and our aim is to set charging rates so that there is no out-of-pocket cost for those hosts for 5 years. I don't, I'm not sure I can guarantee that sort of beyond that. You know, weird things happen sometimes, but that's the way this would work. And the agreement would be that, and certainly our assumption is that in the process of selecting the charging vendor and the companies that do the installation of those chargers, one way or another, we're going to get that maintenance agreement for those 5 years covered in that process. We want this to be a low risk issue for folks. Okay, and then there's a question about the timeline for the installation. So this gets a little bit tricky because, as you probably are all aware, um, the 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 current administration has a different perspective on electric vehicles than the prior administration that awarded these grants. At this point, we have assurance that we have funding to do this planning work. I don't think anyone can predict right now for sure how quickly the construction dollars will come. I think our perspective is we have a federal award and a signed contract for those construction dollars, but it might take a little while for that to flow through. My personal timeline is I am hopeful that by the end of this calendar year, we are submitting that first cohort of sites to the Federal Highway Administration for approval. If we're able to submit those in, let's say, November, a best case scenario might be that in January or February we get approval and we start working on the final design, and then it's easily going to be summer 2026 before any construction would start there, kind of thing. So that's like maybe a best scenario. A worst scenario is it's going to take longer than that for those construction dollars to come out.
It might be helpful to reiterate that up until that point, there's still no cost to you guys on your side, though. So, depending on what happens, if you get to that point, you still don't have a cost associated with it, whether it goes through or if it changes in any way. So, I just want to point that out as something as well.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Pete. Um, then there is a question, is there any experience when chargers are placed close to multifamily housing? How do vehicles churn through the chargers so that not only 4 vehicles get charged a night? So I think very likely because we're talking about level 2 affordable charging, it might well be the case that 4 vehicles get charged over a night. That's that that so I'm an EV driver and I charge my vehicle about once a week because it's got a range of 300 miles and consistent with the NADA's example, we drive probably less than 200 miles a week. So it's not the case that every EV driver needs to plug it in every night. It's more of a rotational thing. So we think level 2 charging in those neighborhoods. There is, in terms of experience on this, just this week, I saw a new set of case studies that one of the national groups put out about best practices around EV charging in multifamily neighborhoods. And I will, as part of the response, will post a link to that. Pete, I'll make sure to get that to you because I think it's there are some examples from other places that might be helpful.
Yep.
What if the person says that the charger hurt their car in some way? Who is responsible insurance wise? I don't know an answer to that right now. I suspect that some of the liability would go back to the charger vendor, who is probably who holds the maintenance agreement there. But we can dig into that a little bit more with some of our allies and try to come back with a better answer for that. Can more than 4 chargers be installed at a site? Example of 6 or 8 if deemed appropriate based on surrounding community. Yes, we would be open to that. That's like a really good question. We have not talked about that. There is this minimum of 4, but it could be more than 4 if the site had a compelling reason for that to happen. Okay, a few questions. Do you have business verticals you anticipate? Um, so the electricity, I'm going to take the second, I'm not sure what you mean by business verticals that you, so because we are talking about affordable neighborhood charging, and because of the way we structured our grant without knowing who the site hosts were up front, this is not a case where we are assuming that specific hosts are going to partner with specific charging vendors to figure out how, this is not the way here in Wisconsin, the fast charging on the interstates is working, where that's a much more of a partnership between a specific charging vendor and a host. This is we're we assume that the folks where we are installing these chargers are much less savvy about EV charging, and hence we're trying to take a lot of the responsibility for selecting vendors and figuring all of that out. Um, so the electricity for the stations will be paid for by the site hosts, but they will also receive the revenue from the charging. And there's a question about us. So we will do an RFP for equipment when we get to the construction phase. Pete, there is a question for you. What NIGP code through OpenGov should a local government use?
Um, so we chose not to utilize an NIGP code in OpenGov for this specific solicitation, um, simply because this is more of a local, like geographical type of solicitation. If we would have put an NIGP code to it, we would have broadcasted a net nationwide, basically. So we did not put one in here for this solicitation. Um, and if you're talking about you are a local government and you're setting up an account, then I would say choose as many that might pertain to what you're looking for. And I think that's kind of difficult, but within OpenGov, you have keyword searching capabilities. So you should be able to use that to kind of figure out what might we be interested in. And honestly, it might be not too many NIGP codes, other than items like this, solicitations like this. And so therefore I would do that keyword search for, again, anything that you might be interested in as a local government. I hope that answers your question. And if not, definitely add another Q&A into there.
A question about, can the site host set time limits on how long a person can use the charger? One of the things that's typically going to be allowed here is you can set limits or set fees for people staying plugged in after they are charged, is sort of the way that works in the charging universe. So you don't end up with someone parked there forever, is that the charging fees have what they call an idling fee, that you're blocking a charger. So that's probably the piece of that that seems most relevant. So I did say that the revenue from the charging goes to the site host and it covers the electricity. That all happens through the charging vendor. So this isn't like a thing you need a bunch of new systems for. It's that you get revenue from one source, and then there is an increase in your electric bill that you're already paying, is kind of the way those pieces fit together. Okay, and so there's a question about a site where they've maybe already done some wiring and could they be reimbursed for the things that have already happened? In general, I would say no. This is federal funding. There's a bunch of rules about how we do that construction. The construction is not yet authorized. I would um I would be surprised if we could reimburse you, but we might be able to leverage some of that existing, if you've already got conduit and wiring running to a certain area of the parking lot, you become a pretty attractive candidate, and we're still helping you finish that installation kind of thing. But I do not think realistically that we could reimburse you for that construction because I'm guessing that construction, it happened before the feds authorized it. They're going to have rules about stuff like that. These are great questions.
Yeah, really good questions,
Holy
Kathy.
cow.
Yep.
So, what prevents a person from parking in charging space but doesn't plug in? It becomes free parking. So, as an EV owner, I can tell you this is a phenomenon out there in the world. We call it being iced because Anita mentioned earlier, internal combustion engine vehicles in the EV world, we call them ICEs. And so someone ices you out of that charging spot. Um, I think this is an issue that I know a variety of local governments in Dane County are having conversations about if there is signage for a spot saying EV parking only, should there be some ticket or something that you get if you're parking there and you're not charging? And that's, I would say, an open dialogue across some communities. It is an issue. Um, I think it's an issue, I hear a lot about that issue from other parts of the country. I do not, as an EV driver who uses public charging now and then places, I do not see that as a big hassle. The other thing, and this is maybe an important point to make about this. So we're talking about like these spots in your parking lot, but we don't really want to be by the front door part of your parking lot. We'd rather be along the side somewhere because those spots are not the ones that maybe your customers use all the time when they come to see you. And honestly, being along the edge of a lot is a little bit easier in terms of the wiring and things. So, like, we're totally good halfway down the parking lot along the edge, not in the spots that everybody wants. I think we see icing being a bigger issue when those look like preferred parking spots in some way. So for the ADA accessible stalls, are they intended to be physically accessible or to be reserved only for cars with a tag? So there is a whole set of, as you might imagine, federal funding, a whole set of guidelines about how that ADA spot has to be configured. I don't remember if they care if they have an ADA tag or not, kind of thing. But it's about the design of that spot, that a vehicle that can access it, that they can access the charging unit, um, someone with visual impairments, someone with a wheelchair. It's a series of those things. And the documents, the other attachments to the RFP detail this. Anita, do you have my memory is it's probably the NEVI standards one that talks about the
I
ADA
think so.
requirements. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a question, while this is a noble topic, is there any discussion that would make charging stations a requirement for multifamily developers for new development and maybe some retailers? Actually, last year, the Wisconsin State Legislature passed a bill related to electric vehicle charging that created the 3-cent excise tax we talked about. But it also, in that bill, forbade municipalities from requiring developers to install EV charging in new development. So at this point, that is a thing that state law doesn't allow local governments to require. The other thing I would say is we have a lot of older multifamily facilities, and you can think across the county of areas where there are 10 or 20 older 4 or 8-plex buildings. We need to think about how we get charging to some of those neighborhoods too. So I think many of the newer high-end multifamily buildings are installing charging. It's a benefit that their tenants want, but we need to think about how to do this in an equitable way for everyone. Okay. Um, there was another question down there and I lost it.
I was answering. Somebody was asking if they have parking available at all times, except during service hours for faith communities. Can they make the parking available to non-EV drivers for those couple hours a week for service hours?
So I would encourage you to apply and let's talk through that and how that could work. I would suggest to you that one answer might be you may have members of your faith community who would like to park there during services. Do we have So, Pete, I'm not sure about the protocol of this. Are we gonna, all the questions in the chat, are you gonna want me to give you an answer that you can post those to, or because we answered them live, they're good? What's your inclination?
Generally, what we do is if any of the questions and therefore answers provided would change the scope of the solicitation in any way, we would post it. Um, I don't think there's a whole lot that we've answered that changes scope that way or anything about the solicitation per se. This has been very informational. So I would say we probably wouldn't. And if we really wanted to, we could look at posting all of them.
Okay, that's just like, I think a helpful thing for us to be able to say that we the webinar here will be posted. There'll be a link on OpenGov. There'll also be a link on our Charge Up Dane County page on our website once we get it posted so that it's everywhere.
Where can we find the FAQs? Somebody's asking.
On OpenGov, must be. Kathy, do you mind if I share my screen quick then?
No, go ahead. You should, you're a panelist. I think you should be able to.
Sending a request. There we
Yep.
go. Okay. So this is the screenshot of OpenGov. However, this is from the inside of it on my side, what I see, not necessarily what a vendor might see signing in. However, from the experience that I have being on the other side in testing, you should have some tabs like this somewhere on your home screen once you get onto the solicitation. Right here is a question and answer. And this is where you'll see all of the questions that have been asked already, and then you'll have the ability to add a question yourself. Um, This looks like it because we've taken questions from emails and posted them to the Q&A. We prefer that you go on to the Q&A portal and post your questions. But if that doesn't happen, we will post them in this way. But you should find a Q&A tab within your OpenGov homepage of the solicitation. And there you'll see project documents, everything's here. You got your overview. That's where your timelines are. Um, Attachment tab, that gives you all of your attachments, and then addenda and notices. So um, hopefully that kind of answers it for you and shows you where to kind of go.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete. And there were a couple of other questions in the so I'm going to do the ADA one first. The restate the answer about ADA parking. Is that spot only usable by those vehicles with an ADA tag? Sorry, I missed that. So typically in EV parking, the way the protocol works is if there is an ADA spot, drivers who are not needing ADA will park at the other spots first. So it's sort of left as the last option for parking. But if all four chargers are filled, it is reasonable that the ADA spot is filled with someone who does not have an ADA tag. So that's allowed. It's that it shouldn't be the first spot that someone takes if they don't need the ADA. So kind of like we think about maybe other ADA accommodations to leave those where we can. And then there was a question about what if a site host wanted level 3 fast charging instead of level 2? So it is substantially more expensive. I would encourage you to apply, and we should have a conversation about that and whether there's a really strong rationale for that. One of the things to understand about level 2 charging is there's a range there. I mean, when Anita talked about level 3, that is so much faster than kind of the base level 2. But there are also slightly faster level 2s that could be, another option for a site. So I think we would encourage you to engage with us and get involved. Level 3 in general is like a factor of 10 more expensive than level 2, would be my sort of rough answer there. But we should have a conversation. Throw your fish in the net. Let's have you be part of this.
Can I add something to that, Kathy? I think you bring up a good point, and you've alluded to it a couple times. If you're on the fence, I would strongly encourage you to go ahead and apply. And by you applying does not lock you into anything. But if you don't apply, it doesn't allow us to have those conversations with you. So I think that's important just to kind of reiterate to everyone. We would encourage you to apply. Even if you're on the fence, you have a different kind of unique situation, a question, anything like that, please go ahead and apply. It does not lock you in. But if you don't apply, it does lock you out, so to speak. So just know that again, it's kind of like it's at no cost other than your time to fill out the application, which is, a handful of questions that go pretty quick. So just want to reiterate that. I think that's an important point, Kathy, that you pointed out there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for restating that in a very clear procurement way.
Yeah.
And then there is a question, if we are unsure, will we have an opportunity to apply later? So we do think we will probably need to issue a second RFP because there will be spots where we think it's really important to have charging that were not filled with the first RFP. The thing, though, consistent with what Pete's saying, I would say to you is if someone else applies and is in our queue that addresses things roughly in your neighborhood, you might not be a priority area in the next time. So this is like your best chance to get in the loop versus later where where we might, it's feasible to me that we might issue a second RFP that we say specifically now, we these areas of Dane County are gaps we still want to fill. So we only want to hear from people in particular communities or neighborhoods. This is the widest net we will ever cast. Oh, you guys are just really good at the hard question. So, if we would like to extend our parking to allow for the EV spots, should we apply? So, we are going to really want to choose existing parking lots. So, you might have a situation where you say, oh, Dane County, we're going to offer you this piece of our existing parking lot, but we're going to expand our lot. That becomes a little bit simpler to me than we are expanding our lot to be the EV parking. And that's just because of the way the federal government requires us to do an environmental review. So if you're turning something that isn't a parking lot into a parking lot for the EV charging, the environmental review gets a lot more complicated and will raise a lot more red flags than if it's existing pavement that exists, sort of thing. So our bias has been for parking that already exists, not a prairie field or something that could be more complicated.
And I think that plays into the timing of the process, right? Through this grant, basically, we have to follow a process. And so the reviews that Kathy mentioned, um, it's not as likely that we would want to choose a location that doesn't have a for sure situation going on. So that is to say, if you were going to extend the parking lot in the next few weeks or month or so, I think that'll play into the timeline for the reviews and all the other stuff that follows versus like, well, we'll extend our parking lot if this happens and we get this. That's going to be a tougher sell just because the process gets changed along the way. So I think timing is kind of a key issue there too.
Thanks, Pete. That was, yeah, a helpful clarification. I'm going to take this one more here. Is there certain population density, walking distance from the site to the apartments that is preferred? So I think our ideal is in the conversations with the MPO, they think the ideal is a tenth of a mile, maybe a quarter of a mile kind of thing, that it's something realistic that maybe one night a week again, I'm going to park my car over there to charge it and walk home. And this isn't, it's not a long distance kind of thing. Again, I think that could vary with neighborhoods and communities, and really that onus is on us. The way we chose to do this in the application is we're asking you to tell us where your site is. We know which parts of the county are categorized as rural and urban. We know where that multifamily housing density is. We're able to kind of overlay those maps and figure that out so that you don't have to try to justify that you are in a particular place.
But don't let that prevent you from applying either. What the ideal is, well, that's one thing. And the reality is, whoever is looking at this to apply, we want you to apply so we can look at that, put that pin on that map, see where
Right,
it is. Because
right.
if there's no one else around, yeah, it's maybe not an ideal according to that definition, but that is the next best option available, and it would work through this grant.
Yeah,
So let it.
exactly. 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 There are going to be some as we go through this, there will be some creative compromises that help us get things places. So the next question here is, and I'm going to say this is the last question because it's 11 o'clock and I want to respect that we said this would be an hour. So if people want to suggest sites that they don't own, there actually is a spot on our map, DaneClimateAction.org. Under initiatives is Charge Up Dane County, and there are some maps there where you can drop a pin where you think there should be charging. And we have an EV advisory commission as part of this process. Just this morning, I was emailing some local governments about pins that have been dropped in the map and saying, hey, these are sites you should try to figure out where the charging could be. This is in your community. So yes, we welcome that feedback of folks saying, hey, here's a site where I think charging should happen. Definitely. And maybe to close, I will just say that if you continue to have questions, Pete showed you how on OpenGov to put those questions in there. We will get you answers as quickly as we can. We appreciate all of you being here and being interested in this project. We think this is an important opportunity for our communities, and we really appreciate how much response there is to this opportunity. So with that, I will say we're done.
I'll just throw in one last thing as the purchasing guy. I always got to do this. Deadlines. Reminder on the deadlines. The question deadline is Tuesday, June 3rd. And then the more important deadline, submission deadline, is Friday, June 13th at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. And now I'm realizing that is Friday the 13th. So take that for whatever that means. But June 13th, make sure you get it in. Try to start it early. Get in there early just in case you have technical difficulties. Get them in early. So that's all I have. I appreciate everyone's time today as well.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.